The baton came down before Renata Calloway finished reaching for her ID. Glass exploded across the passenger seat in a bright green spray, and for one full second she didn't move at all because her mind hadn't caught up to what her body already understood. This was not a stop anymore. This was something else. "Hands where I can see them!" Officer Renner shouted, already reaching through the broken frame for the door handle. Behind her, a second officer's hand closed around her wrist before she'd even opened her own door.
"I was reaching for my identification,"
she said. Her voice didn't shake. That would matter later, though she didn't know it yet. "It's in the case on the passenger seat. On the ground. Now." She went down onto the hot asphalt with a police officer's knee against her shoulder blade, her cream blazer scraping pavement, her hands pulled behind her back before she'd finished her sentence. 90 minutes from now, a room full of council members, reporters, and command staff would be waiting for her at City Hall. Right now, none of that existed. Right now, there was only asphalt and glass, and a stranger's hand tightening a cuff, one notch past necessary. "Sir, I need you to tell me what I'm being charged with. Reckless movement toward a concealed object during a felony stop." "There is no felony here. Run my plate again." Renner didn't answer. He was already circling toward the passenger seat, where a slim black case sat undisturbed among the glass. That was the first thing that should have told him something was wrong. She hadn't fought. She hadn't raised her voice. A woman being arrested for a burglary crew vehicle match was calmly requesting a plate recheck, like she'd done it 100 times. Officer Marcus Cole, 18 months on the job, stood a few feet back, with his hand still resting near his own belt, watching the woman's face instead of her hands. She wasn't looking at Renner. She was looking at the case. "Renner," Cole said. "Dispatch flagged that plate as a possible match 6 hours ago. Shouldn't that have cleared by now? It's still active in the system. It says unverified, not active." Renner didn't look at him. "Then we verify it. That's what we're doing." A woman crossing the intersection had stopped on the median, phone already up, filming through the gap between two idling cars. A man in scrubs, halfway into a coffee shop doorway, turned back to watch instead of going inside. Nobody moved to help. Nobody moved at all. That was its own kind of violence, the stillness of people deciding, without saying it out loud, that this wasn't their problem. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Cole asked, crouching slightly, keeping his voice level in a way that was almost an apology. "Renata Calloway." Something flickered behind his eyes, a half-second of recognition he couldn't place, gone as fast as it came. He'd heard that name somewhere. He filed it away and didn't say anything, because Renner was already talking over both of them. "That case doesn't move until I clear the vehicle," Renner said, more to the growing handful of onlookers than to her. His voice had changed, louder now, aimed at an audience instead of a suspect. "We've had 4 burglaries on this corridor in 2 weeks. I'm not taking chances. You already have my registration," Calloway said from the ground. "You already have my insurance. The case is briefing material. It is not evidence of anything, and it will not be searched without documentation. You don't get to tell me how to run my scene. I'm not telling you how to run it. I'm telling you what happens to it afterward, if you don't." Renner laughed, short, humorless, performing now for the phone across the street as much as for her. "Lady, you're on the ground in cuffs. You're not telling anybody anything." Cole's jaw tightened. He said nothing. That silence would cost him later, and some part of him already knew it. A patrol radio crackled from Renner's shoulder. Dispatch, half garbled. Something about a supervisor requesting confirmation on unit location. Renner reached up and turned the volume down without answering it. He crossed to the passenger side, boots crunching over broken glass, and closed his hand around the black case sitting untouched on the seat. From the ground, still cuffed, still calm, in a way that made the crowd across the street go quiet, Renata Calloway spoke without raising her voice at all. "Officer Renner, that case does not leave this scene without a documented chain of custody. If you open it, I need you to understand exactly what you're opening." Renner's thumb was already on the latch. Renner's thumb was already on the latch. But what he was about to find would change everything. Before we find out what was inside that case, like this video, subscribe and comment below. What do you think Renata was carrying? The latch. Renner expected a weapon, or something close enough to justify the last 20 minutes in a single glance. Instead, a tablet in a padded sleeve. A black binder, transition command briefing, restricted, and under it, a manila folder sealed with a numbered tamper strip. One tab of a second folder just visible beneath that. Personal review, patrol division. He didn't open the second folder. He didn't need to. The words did what a weapon would have done. And worse, they made him a suspect in his own investigation before anyone else in the building knew there was one. "What is this?" he said, not really to her. "Something you were told not to open." He closed the case. He didn't log that he'd opened it at all. That omission would outlive the stop by months. Intake reshaped the story before a single word was written down. Renner kept repeating the same 4 words to anyone who'd listen: sudden move, concealed object, until they came out smooth, rehearsed, a phrase built for a hearing that hadn't happened yet. Sergeant Aaron Holt took the incident number with the mild irritation of a man pulled off a slow evening, then looked past Renner at the woman being processed. Blazer torn, a cut swelling above one eyebrow. She resisted. Furtive movement. "Reached for the case before I could clear the scene." Holt looked at Calloway. She said nothing. The silence unsettled him more than an argument would have, his first small loss of ground, though he wouldn't have called it that. "Get her processed. Report on my desk before shift change." Officer Marcus Cole watched the case go into a property bag unlogged. The broken seal on the manila folder never mentioned by anyone filling out the intake sheet. He'd seen that seal intact through the windshield 20 minutes earlier. He almost said something. He didn't, and the not saying sat in his chest like a swallowed stone as he walked past the bulletin board, and a name snagged on something in his memory the way a hook catches fabric. Not painful yet. Just caught. Calloway, R. Command staff, or all. Thursday, 0800. Dispatch called his unit number before the thought finished forming. A welfare check, 3 blocks over. Routine. He told himself the name would still be there when he got back, and it was. But by then it had already stopped feeling urgent, which was its own kind of danger. Holt sat across from Renner in a windowless office, an incident report open between them, mostly blank. "Walk me through it." She wouldn't comply. "I gave commands. You broke a window before you had cause for anything." Holt didn't look up. "I need this defensible. Not honest. Defensible. That's not the same thing." "No," Holt agreed. "It isn't." He turned the report around, picked up the pen himself, and wrote 4 words at the top in his own hand before sliding it back. "Consistent with concealing weapon." Renner looked at his sergeant's handwriting sitting inside his own report like something planted there. "Write your own version," Holt said, almost gently, "and walk out of this building tonight without a badge. Or copy that line, sign it, go home." There was a version of this moment where Renner asked for a union rep, where he told Holt to put his own name on the line if he believed it. He thought instead about the sealed folder still downstairs with his division's name across the header and what might already be written about him inside it, and he picked up the pen. Holt watched him sign it, and for one unguarded second, something in his face wasn't control. It was relief. A man who has just made himself smaller in order to stay safe rarely notices the trade until much later. For a few minutes, nothing moved. Cole sat at his own desk finishing a fuel log nobody would ever read closely, and let himself believe, briefly, that the maintenance note he'd typed earlier, 6 words, buried, unremarkable, was enough. That he'd done something without doing anything that could be traced back to him. It was a comfortable thought, and it lasted exactly as long as it took him to glance up and see Holt walking the signed report toward the captain's mailbox himself, instead of leaving it for the overnight clerk the way policy required. Whatever Cole had told himself 30 seconds earlier stopped being true. At the evidence terminal, he pulled the field again anyway. But Lug, Unit 14, 1452, 07. The transcript sat there exactly as he remembered hearing it cut off. Plate confidence downgraded to 61%. Below stop threshold. Repeat, below threshold. He didn't print it. He didn't copy it anywhere Holt could find. He'd already used the only quiet move available to him once. Using it twice would start looking like a pattern to anyone who checked access logs. And he understood now. watching Holt hand carry a false report past the normal chain, that someone in this building was already checking things they weren't supposed to. Diane Ferris walked into the lobby at 5:40, holding her phone in both hands like it might slip. I was on the corner, 5th and Larkin. I recorded some of it. The desk officer reached to log it as evidence. Holt appeared before the sentence finished, faster than a routine statement warranted. "Ma'am, I appreciate you coming in." His voice had gone warm in a way that didn't match the rest of him. "If you leave the original device, we'll preserve it properly. I can send a copy tonight. Chain of custody really does need the original." She looked at him a beat too long. Long enough that Cole, pretending to finish paperwork 15 feet away, felt his own pulse climb watching someone else hesitate the exact way he had an hour earlier, for the exact same reason. "I'll think about it," Diane said and put the phone back in her purse. Holt's composure cracked for 1 second as she walked out. Not anger. Arithmetic. A man recalculating how many separate copies of the truth were still loose in a building he'd thought he controlled. Cole saw it. He filed it beside the dispatch log, the bulletin board, and a sealed folder with his own precinct's letterhead on it, and understood without being able to say why yet that all 4 were pieces of the same collapsing thing. Down the corridor, hands finally uncuffed, Renata Calloway looked up at the deputy stationed by her door. "Has anyone told City Hall I'm late?" The deputy didn't answer. But at the front desk, a phone rang for the second time in 20 minutes, and this time the dispatcher wrote the caller's question down word for word before carrying it toward Holt's office instead of the captain's south. "Has anyone seen Renata Calloway?" Holt read it standing in the hallway, report still in his other hand, and for the first time all evening, he went completely still. Holt didn't sit down this time. He stood at the small table in the interview room with a single printed page and a pen, and set both down in front of Calloway, like he was closing something rather than opening it. "Acknowledgement of property release," he said. "You sign, you get your car and your belongings tonight, and none of this needs to leave the building." She read it without picking it up. "This says, I have no complaint regarding the handling of seized material. That's the standard language. It's not standard, it's specific." She looked up at him. "You wrote this in the last 20 minutes. Holt's jaw worked once. "I'm offering you a way out of here tonight instead of tomorrow. I was already going to be out of here tonight." She slid the page back across the table, untouched. "You're offering me a way out of here quietly." That was the difference, and both of them understood it now. She had wanted this to end without ever becoming a story, without a captain's signature buried in a personnel file, without her first week in office defined by a roadside argument. That version of tonight was gone. Holt had just spent it, and he didn't seem to know it yet. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Put that in your report too." He picked the page back up and left without another word, and for the first time since the window broke, Calloway allowed herself one full breath before straightening in the chair again. The afternoon ceremony was gone. She'd known that for an hour, City Hall didn't hold a swearing-in for 90 minutes past its start time, not with reporters in the room, but the calendar had already solved that problem for her, days before any of this happened. Command staff orientation, 0800 Thursday. If she wasn't standing in that room, recognized, sworn, and in command, the absence itself would become the story instead of anything that had happened on the roadside. 13 hours. She did the math without needing to look at a clock. Cole found it by accident. He'd pulled up his own body camera assignment record, nothing to do with the stop, just closing out his shift equipment log when a status line caught his eye. Auto sync. Complete. 14:31. 15:47. His unit had been recording the whole time he stood near the Bentley, near the Escalade. He corrected himself, still shaking the reference script's ghost out of his head. And unlike the department's local server, his camera synced automatically to a state-managed cloud account the moment it came back into wireless range. Nobody controlled that account from inside this building. He sat with that for a long moment, doing nothing about it, because doing something about it right now meant explaining why he'd looked, and explaining why he'd looked meant explaining the dispatch log, the bulletin board, the folder tab he still hadn't mentioned to anyone, knowing something, and being able to safely say it out loud were turning out to be two very different amounts of power. Diane Ferris's phone rang at 6:50, a block number, and the voice on the other end introduced himself only as Records and asked, politely, whether she still had the footage from this afternoon, and whether she understood that withholding evidence in an active investigation carried its own consequences. She hung up without answering either question. She stood in her kitchen for a while after that, phone in her hand, the recording still sitting untouched in her camera roll. She didn't delete it. She didn't send it either. She opened her contacts, scrolled to her daughter's name, and put the phone down again without calling. Not yet. But her hand had moved farther than it had that afternoon, and that was something. Holt went to evidence processing himself once the waiver failed, telling the property clerk he wanted to review the intake personally. He examined the sealed folder's broken tamper strip, the tablet, the binder, and made a note reclassifying the personnel review folder as administrative material, non-evidentiary, a phrase that would let it be filed somewhere far less scrutinized than an active investigation locker. He felt, doing it, something close to relief. Every loose piece he could find was now accounted for. The report was signed. The witness hadn't handed over her phone. The camera that had actually recorded the roadside stop sat corrupted in an evidence bag, and as far as he knew, that was the only copy that had ever existed. He didn't know about Cole's shoulder camera. He had no reason to. At 7:05, the front desk phone rang for the fourth time that hour, and this time the dispatcher didn't write anything down. She just looked up, found Holt through the glass of the property room, and raised her voice enough to carry. "Captain, there's a car from the county attorney's office pulling into the lot, and somebody in a city vehicle right behind it." Holt set down the folder he was holding. Now? Now. The clock above the intake counter read 7:05. 12 hours and 55 minutes remained until a room full of command staff expected their new chief standing at the front of it, sworn and unquestioned. Nobody in the building yet understood that both numbers belonged to the same deadline. Michael Reeves didn't wait to be invited past the front counter. It was 7:40, and he was mid-50s, unhurried in the way people become when they've spent a career being right in rooms that didn't want them there, and he had a woman beside him, Elena Vance, from the mayor's transition office, carrying a folder she hadn't opened yet. "I need to see Renata Calloway," Reeves said. "Now." Holt stepped into the gap between the counter and the corridor, still moving like a man in charge of the building. "She's part of an active investigation into unlawful possession of restricted county material. She's the reason that material exists," Reeves said. "Take me to her." Holt hesitated exactly long enough for Vance to open the folder and hold up a single page, a county seal, a line of appointment language, a signature. He didn't finish reading it. He didn't need to. "Get her," he said to the deputy beside him, and something in his voice had already started to change shape. Renner was the one standing closest when she walked out of the interview room, hands finally free of everything but a torn sleeve and a healing cut. And he was the one who said it out loud before anyone told him not to. He looked at Vance's folder, then back at Calloway, doing arithmetic he didn't want the answer to. "You're the new chief." "I was an hour ago too," Calloway said. "You just didn't ask." He had no response to that. There wasn't one that helped him. She didn't look at him again. She turned to Reeves instead, and the calm she'd held since the roadside didn't crack open into relief the way he might have expected. It sharpened. "I want every evidence record in this building frozen as of right now," she said. "Nothing moved, nothing reclassified, nothing signed. I'm not running this investigation. I was detained in it. But I am telling you what happens to it starting this minute." "Understood," Reeves said, and meant it. Holt opened his mouth to object to the word frozen, to the word reclassified, to all of it, and then closed it again, because objecting now would mean explaining why those particular words made him uncomfortable. It was after 8:30 by the time the evidence room officially went under freeze. Every log was signed and countersigned. Cole watched from the evidence corridor, his own body camera still clipped to his chest, still carrying 14 minutes of footage nobody had asked him about, and understood that the next 30 seconds were going to cost him something, no matter what he did. He walked up to Vance instead of Reeves, because Reeves looked like a man used to being lied to, and Vance looked like someone still capable of being surprised. "My camera synced automatically this afternoon," he said. Before Sergeant Holt reclassified the intake folder, before the report was rewritten, "It's not in this building, it's on a state cloud account nobody here can touch." He paused. It was never logged into evidence at all. It couldn't be frozen, because it was never inside the system you just froze. Vance looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this now instead of 2 hours ago?" "Because 2 hours ago I didn't think anyone outside this building would believe me over him." He glanced toward Holt, who was still arguing with Reeves in a lowered voice by the counter. "I'm telling you now because it stopped mattering whether I'd get in trouble for it. It wasn't bravery, exactly. It was closer to relief, the specific kind that comes from finally putting down something heavy he'd been carrying without admitting the weight." Holt's account of the evening had one advantage until that moment. It was the only account anyone outside the building had access to. Camera corrupted. Media unreadable. A clean, defensible story built on the assumption that nothing existed to contradict it. He didn't know about Cole's camera. He'd never had a reason to check. When Reeves turned from the counter and asked him, flatly, whether any other recording devices had been active on scene, Holt answered without missing a beat. Just the one unit's dash and body cameras, both compromised. Cole was still standing 8 feet away. Nobody had told Holt yet. That gap between what Holt believed he'd contained and what had already slipped past him was the only kind of collapse that ever really worked, not an accusation. A man confidently describing a version of events that had already stopped being true. At her kitchen table across town, close to 9:30, Diane Ferris watched a local news alert crawl across her phone screen. Unusual activity reported outside 3rd Precinct. County officials on scene, and felt something in her decide itself without asking permission first. She didn't call the station. She called her daughter instead. "I'm bringing the phone in myself," she said. "Tomorrow morning." "Not tonight. I want daylight, and I want you with me." "Mom, I already decided. I just wanted someone to know before I did it." It wasn't the bravest version of the choice available to her. It was the version she could actually make, and by the framework of the night, that made it the only one that counted. Reeves found Calloway near the property room a little after 10, where she stood looking through the glass at a black case with a broken seal, a binder, and a manila folder marked in a stranger's handwriting. Administrative material. Non-evidentiary. "Orientation is still 0800, he said. "The county isn't moving it. If you're not standing in that room tomorrow, sworn and undisputed, the story stops being about tonight and starts being about why the new chief never showed up." Calloway didn't take her eyes off the folder. "Then I'll be there. You understand what's still unresolved, the footage, the dispatch log, whatever's actually inside that second folder. I understand all of it," she said. "None of it changes what time the sun comes up. 9 hours and 40 minutes remained. It was 10:20. By 6 in the morning, 3 separate accounts of the same afternoon no longer agreed with each other, and only one of them had never changed. Cole's footage, formally logged the moment daylight made it defensible to log, showed the registration clearing before the first window broke. The dispatch transcript showed the downgrade Renner had muted mid-sentence. And when Diane Ferris walked into the precinct at 7, her daughter beside her, phone held out before anyone asked twice, her video matched both. Same angle Cole hadn't had. Same moment Renner had sworn didn't exist. "I wanted daylight," she told the desk officer, "and I wanted someone with me." Nobody asked her to explain further. Nobody needed to. Holt watched his own voice come back to him through a laptop speaker in an interview room he'd occupied a dozen times from the other side of the table. "You write that her movement was consistent with concealing a weapon." His handwriting was still visible in the corner of the scanned report. 4 words that had felt like control the night before, and now looked like a signature on a confession. "You can still correct the record," the investigator told him. "Before this becomes formal." Holt looked at the page for a long moment. He could have said the coaching was standard procedure, softened under pressure, misremembered in the chaos of a long night. It might even have been partly true. "No," he said, "it's accurate. I wrote it." He wasn't confessing. He still believed, even then, that he'd been managing a difficult night the only way anyone reasonably could. That belief was the last thing to go, and it went quietly, the way most real collapses do, Not a breakdown, just a man running out of room to stand. At 7:58, Renata Calloway stood outside the main conference room at Ashford Heights headquarters in a blazer that wasn't the one she'd worn the day before. The torn one sat, cleaned but unrepaired, in a drawer in her new office. She decided against fixing it before she decided much else about the job. Someone announced her. She had 90 seconds between the introduction and the moment she'd actually have to speak, and she spent all of them looking at a room that didn't yet know what had happened 12 hours earlier, and one man near the back, Cole, still in uniform. Still not sure where he stood, who did. Yesterday afternoon, she said, I was stopped, searched, and detained by 2 officers of this department. I want to be direct about that before anything else, because the alternative is letting this room hear it from somewhere else first. Nobody moved, a few phones came out and were quietly put away again. An investigation is already underway, and it will conclude independently of me. What I can tell you now is that it uncovered more than one incident. It uncovered a pattern, evidence altered, reports rewritten, a witness pressured to hand over her own recording. Effective this morning, evidence handling in every division of this department goes through mandatory dual authorization, and any deletion of recorded material triggers automatic outside review. She paused. I didn't design this job to punish anyone. I designed it because a woman named Diane Ferris drove home last night, not knowing if bringing in her own phone would put her in danger, and that should never be true in a city with a functioning police department. Renner was not in the room. He'd been placed on administrative leave before sunrise, and the paperwork that followed over the coming weeks read the way paperwork like that usually does: slow, procedural, unglamorous. Ending eventually in a hearing that cost him his badge and opened him to charges no one in that room needed to watch happened to feel the weight of it. Holt's removal took longer, but once investigators started pulling threads from folders far older than Calloway's case, the pattern became impossible to contain. He was fired months later, his pension challenged, and the complaints he'd spent years quietly burying were reopened one by one. There was no applause when either name came up in the following days. Just a kind of careful quiet, the sound of people privately revising what they thought they'd known about men they'd worked beside for years. Cole stayed on patrol. Calloway didn't promote him, and when he asked her, once, whether staying quiet as long as he had would follow him, she told him the truth. It already has. What matters now is what you do with the 18 months you have left on this job. She didn't say it unkindly. Doing the right thing late doesn't erase the cost of waiting. He nodded and went back to his shift, and 3 weeks later a driver on Fifth Avenue got a warning instead of a search, and never once suspected how close a stop like that had come to going very differently in this city, not so long ago. Calloway kept the torn blazer in her office for the rest of that year. Not framed, not labeled, just folded in a drawer she opened sometimes when a decision felt easy and needed to feel harder than that. She never explained it to anyone who asked. She didn't need to. The record, for once, stayed exactly as written. Have you ever watched someone get punished before anyone bothered to find out who they really were? If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe for more stories about dignity, truth, and justice, and share it with someone who still believes those things matter. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration.